Hello everyone. Welcome back to LoFi Yoga. And today we're going to be reading together. I thought since this is Women's History Month, it may be a good idea to read this book. I started reading it, I'm going to say at the end of last year. And I got sidetracked by other books and I didn't pick it back up until a little bit ago. And I think it's perfect for this month. I think it's definitely the way to go. So the book is called The Last Caretaker, and it's by Jessica Strawser. So the reason why I wanted to read this one in particular is because, unfortunately, a part of women's history involves getting away from dangerous men. And that's kind of the focal point of the story, and it resonated, and I want to share it. So here we go. A rainy day had never been so welcome. A soft, steady spring shower pattered on the slanted roof of the loft, enveloping the three women inside in the soothing white noise and the sense of security that no one would slosh through the maze of puddles to come knocking. Lindsay had slept until 9, but looked no less exhausted. The morning's thick gray cloud cover seemed to have stretched even here, from the dark saucers under her eyes to the bruise blooming around the gash in her forehead. Still, she hadn't looked pained or sluggish as she made herself a cup of tea with honey. She moved, instead, in the slightly self-conscious way of someone determined to show, everything is fine, this is fine, we are fine, as she joined Katie and Beth at the table, where she dug into the bagel with gusto. Beth couldn't seem to stop looking around the room, shaking her head in amazement. Before she'd called her office to say she'd be in late with the truthful excuse of helping the caretaker. She'd second-guessed whether she should come along. What if the two of them overwhelmed Lindsay, like some panel of well-meaning but ill-equipped do-gooders? But Katie didn't know the area, even a little bit. The bigger risk seemed that Lindsay could drop some crucial reference that would go over Katie's head, but ring a bell for Bess. Besides, Katie had never known Bess to overwhelm anyone. So you've worked here for years and honestly never knew this apartment was here? Lindsay asked Bess now, mouthful of bagel, tugging at the foil seal atop the yogurt. Beth smiled reassuringly. We're on the private residence part of the property, and I do the public-facing stuff. I always tried not to bother the last caretaker. Most staffers do the same. Lindsay nodded, like she hadn't really doubted it. It was Katie who needed to hear it again and again. Bess is the best friend I've ever had, she told Lindsay. We can trust her. Then, too, Lindsay had only shrugged, as if they'd reached some truce, which Katie supposed they had. So listen, Katie said now. Might as well get right to it. We think our best chance of helping you is to find out more about who gave you that card. You mentioned a baker? Lindsay nodded, eyes on her yogurt as she swirled her spoon in a figure 8. Katie cleared her throat. Why was she so nervous? This was just a conversation. They were just people. Outside of this, they might even be friends. Maybe they still would be. I did a search for local cupcake shops and couldn't believe how many there are. Do you remember her name? Katie asked gently. What the bakery is called? Lindsay narrowed her eyes, trying to remember as she mechanically swallowed one heaping spoonful of yogurt after another. I'm drawing a blank. That's okay, Katie told herself, refusing to let this low-grade panic rise any higher. We'll narrow this down. We can start with how they met and... I know the street it's on, though, Lindsay finished. Oh! Katie's hand flew to her chest. Excellent. Whew! Bess leaned toward Lindsay, sprawling her hands on the tabletop in a disarming, motherly way. Can you start at the beginning? Walk us through the whole thing? Last night was all about getting you safe, but if you're up to it, the more you can tell us about how you came this far, the better our chances are making sure you can continue. Lindsay nodded. I woke up thinking the same thing. I just hope she'll talk to you. I mean, I think she will, but I didn't do what she said. She might be mad. I don't see how she could be mad, Katie said. She obviously wanted to help you. Well, she was pretty mad the last time I saw her. Lindsay pushed her chair back from the table and pulled her knees up to sit cross-legged. She looked younger that way, and for the first time since last night, a little scared. So, the beginning. Lindsay stopped short. Look, it's hard to tell this story without details of who I am, but I'm not sure my name's not even Lindsay. I forget all details as soon as I don't need them anymore, Beth said cheerily, and often before I'm done needing them. Personal policy. Couldn't change it if I tried. I forget why. Katie nodded. I'll vouch for that. Also, she tends to rub off on me. We start talking the same, our cycles sync, and we forget the same stuff. Lindsay, or not Lindsay, tried to smile. I remember wishing my name was Lindsay as a kid. I thought everyone should get to pick their own names once they reached a certain age. It seemed so unfair parents got to stick you with a name your whole life. She shook her head. I don't know when I lost that fire, not to let someone else define me. Maybe you can stay Lindsay now, Katie offered. Maybe you can pick. I used to wish for a different name too, Beth said, but I forget what. Lindsay laughed more genuinely. Okay. She paused to take a steadying breath. I was walking to work one day from the bus stop. I never did that. Usually I drove and parked in the lot out back, but my right foot was in a boot, so I was stuck with the bus for 6 weeks. Crutches on a bus does not sound fun, Katie sympathized. It's even less fun than it sounds, but I'd had a bad fall. It was a miracle the boot was all I needed. She lowered her eyes and let the implication hang in the room. So I'm clumping down the sidewalk, trying to get the hang of this thing, when the shop door flies open and some chick with pink hair is frantically waving me inside. I look up, see it's the cupcake place, and my first thought is, she feels sorry for me. Free cupcakes for pathetic people. I'm like, no thanks, I can't carry it anyway. But she hissed at me. I need to talk to you, come in here. Weird, Beth said. It was, plus I was late for work, but she wouldn't take no. Put her arm right around me and steered me in there. The bakery was empty except for us, and she starts telling me, real matter-of-factly, that my boyfriend is stalking me. Katie sensed Beth sensing beside her. She found herself holding very still, trying not to breathe, trying not to blink. It was funny, Lindsay went on, because part of me was like, tell me something I don't know, and another part was like, well, I think stalking is a strong word. That's how you get twisted up, I guess, after years of manipulation. You feel called out and you're rationalizing, but you're not making sense. Lindsay took her time with the story, putting them there in the empty cupcake shop. How the baker had locked the door, taken off her apron, insisted Lindsay sit down. How she told Lindsay her name, which Lindsay soon forgot as the horror of what was happening swelled in her brain, leaving no room for anything else. How she described Lindsay's longtime boyfriend, confirmed she had the right guy, confirmed that they were on again, off again constantly, and when they were off, he'd come here for a vantage point of the salon where Lindsay worked, kitty corner down the block. How the baker had shown her the exact spot where he'd stood sentry at the window, recounting the orders of coffees he hadn't even pretended to drink. How the baker had hated that, how she couldn't find a polite way to make him leave, how she tried once and he'd gotten menacing, defensive that there was no law against a paying customer looking out the window. The baker, Lindsay said, had a lot of questions for her then. How had she hurt her foot? What about the sling on her arm last month? What about the morning the word had appeared spray painted across the salon window? What about the month she'd commuted with 2 busted taillights until she'd saved enough money to have them fixed? Did she have kids? Was she close to her family, and did they know? What other ties might be difficult to walk away from if it came to that? Did she understand the danger of this level of obsession? Did she have an escape plan? An escape plan. The baker had pulled her in to offer her one, but she'd come on much too strong, scaring Lindsay off with the sheer volume of offenses she'd been chronicling, with the length of time she'd so closely been watching. So what if she was right? So what if she was telling Lindsay something she didn't know? That even on days she thought he'd left her alone, he never had, probably never would. It seemed to Lindsay that the baker had sort of been stalking her too. And she'd said so. The baker had not taken this well. When she realized she'd gone about this wrong, the baker had gotten worked up, begging Lindsay to look past all that, to focus on what mattered, on her good intentions, and to let her help. Asking if they could try again, talk later when they were both calmer, when Lindsay had more time to think. But not too much time, because the thing about guys like this was, time could run out. I have to get to work, was all Lindsay could say. You're making me late. You're making everything worse. I wasn't even supposed to do this, the baker had pleaded. We're supposed to go through the proper channels. She was part of a grassroots network that helped women get away from guys like that, she'd explained. Guys who'd never be deterred by a restraining order. Guys who'd never lose interest no matter how many times you broke up. Guys who might decide that if they can't have you, no one can. But the network was careful. Systematic secrecy was the only way to keep everyone involved safe. As such, the baker had rules she was supposed to follow. I've never done this before, obviously. Not exactly successful, she'd gone on. But I saw you hobble off that bus and I thought, to hell with the rules, we might not have the luxury. But Lindsay had been too taken aback to be moved. Even now, telling the story, she could only remember her embarrassment. She'd wanted to get the hell out of there, even if she was running right back towards something far more dangerous. At least that danger was familiar. It didn't challenge her. It merely controlled her. You don't need my name, she told the baker coldly. If you want to help me, leave me alone. She was ashamed to think of it now, the way she'd recoiled from the offer of help, reacted with fear instead of the relief she should have felt that someone had seen the truth of her life in all the desperation it had become. The way she thumped on her crutches to the door and demanded to be let out like she was being held hostage. I'm not supposed to do this either, the baker said, pulling out a card, scrawling on it in pen, pressing it into her hand. But I can't shake the feeling you're going to need it. This is only for an emergency, okay? Ideally, we get you in the pipeline first. When you're ready, the best thing is to come see me, but this caretaker will have my back if you have no other choice. Lindsay, she could hardly bear to recount this last part, had thrown the card on the floor. That's when the baker stopped apologizing. She'd snatched it from the tile and met Lindsay's gaze with eyes blazing. I'm not unlocking this door until you take the card. He stands here and tracks you. Do you hear me? He is impervious to everything around him. He doesn't care about anything else. He doesn't care what anyone thinks. He stands right here. Lindsay's eyes were glistening by the time her story was done. I walked the long way around from the bus stop after that. I never even risked a look in the direction of the bakery. I guess that's why I don't recall the name. There's always this delivery van out front, though, with a cupcake on the side. You can't miss it. I wondered a lot about the van after that day, if it was really just delivering cupcakes. Missed my chance to find out, I guess. Katie exchanged a look with Beth. Her instinct was to offer Lindsay words of comfort that anyone would have been freaked out in her shoes. But none of them would be in this mess if Lindsay had agreed right then, if she'd followed the proper channels, whatever those were. How long ago was that? Bess asked finally. Lindsay hugged her knees and pulled a face. Before Thanksgiving. She was shivering now, shrinking before their eyes. Please don't ask what took me so long, but you can tell her she was right. She told me so, and I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Hey, Beth stood and crossed to the couch where she retrieved the throw blanket and wrapped it around Lindsay's shoulders. She did not give you that card so she could say I told you so. It's going to be okay. We'll get you sorted. Lindsay swallowed hard. I just hope this network is still, it's going to save my life. That sounds so dramatic, but I get it now. I get why she was so. Her voice trailed off again, and the three women sat in silence, absorbing the rhythm of the rain. All the best new seasons started this way, didn't they? With a messy, muddy cleanse, stretches of dreariness, all that fallen dead brush to clear. And then one day, the whole world was transformed, full of color and sun. New life budding even now, in the rain, because of the rain. You said she asked about your family, Katie ventured. Do you have people who might be worried about you right now, looking for you? Lindsay shook her head. When I told her I didn't have family, I thought she'd act like that was sad. But it seemed to be the answer she was looking for. I guess it's easier this way. I do have a sister, but... Well, do either of you have a sister? 3 brothers, Beth said, which is every bit as insane as it sounds. I have a sister, Katie heard herself say, 2 years older. Even now, with this far more pressing problem right in front of her, she couldn't duck the wrecking ball of guilt that usually followed thoughts of Gigi. Did you go through that love-hate phase? Lindsay asked, her expression hard to read. Expectant yet flat. 1 second you're closer than best friends could ever be, the next you're clawing each other's eyes out because someone borrowed a sweater without asking. Funny enough, this was almost exactly how Gigi had described the relationship between her own 2 daughters the last time she and Katie spoke a few days ago. Katie's nieces were 9 and 10. When they were babies, strangers would do double takes at Gigi's full stroller saying, "Why, they're Irish twins in every sense, aren't they?" And Gigi never minded until their father up and returned to Ireland. Alone. You'd think Katie and Gigi's mutual bad luck with husbands would have brought them together, but... We were never close enough for that, Katie admitted, careful not to say too much. Lindsay was prepared to walk away from anyone who'd ever known her and become someone else. And where Katie could relate on certain levels, her sister was not one of them. Gigi had needed her these past years, had needed anyone who could help her hold it together through single motherhood. And what had Katie done? Time after time, she ducked and dodged, wrapped up in the all-consuming task of trying to make her husband love her, and avoiding those adorable red-headed, pig-tailed reminders of what she and Clark had almost had. Even then, the shame of it had burned deep within her, but not deep enough to change her singular focus. The more he pulled away, the more hell-bent she'd become on fixing things. Not with Gigi, her nieces, or anyone who deserved it, but with Clark. Clark. She was determined to change all that now. The new Katie would be not just a better friend, but a better sister, a better aunt. She'd already invited her nieces to come this summer, allowing Gigi to enroll in the 5-week intensive that would finally complete her MBA. It was all arranged. Gigi had secured a leave of absence from her job, with a badly needed pay raise awaiting her at the end of it. Camp Aunt Katie, they were calling it. Gigi had cried actual tears of gratitude, even as she'd almost seemed suspicious at the offer, waiting for the catch. Katie blinked at Lindsay, realizing there might be a catch after all. She could not have children here running free if this was going on behind the scenes. No, summer was months away, Lindsay would be long gone by then, and this was surely a misunderstanding. A one-time thing. Well, trust me, Lindsay said, laughing ruefully. Nothing wrong with skipping the love-hate phase. Somehow, we swung over to hate one day and stayed there. So no, she won't worry about me. No reason to start now. Bess caught Katie's eye, looking sheepish. Her brothers lived hours away in her hometown, but they were fiercely protective of Bess in an almost jovial, I'd like to see you try it kind of way. The first time Katie had met them, in fact, something about Bess made more sense. Like maybe she'd become who she was because they had her back no matter what. Bess wasn't the only one in her family who wasn't big on asking questions. And even when Gigi had called Katie out for being distant at best, selfish at worst, hate was never in their vocabulary. Hate wasn't an option. Their parents had retired to Fort Lauderdale, promptly divorced, and both remarried younger partners who still had kids in high school. Gigi and Katie didn't begrudge them their new families, but they didn't feel a part of them. No matter what else happened between the sisters, they'd always have that in common. They could relate to Lindsay on a lot of fronts, but only to a point. Thank goodness for that, though the thought of it felt privileged and wrong. Katie cleared her throat and asked, as neutrally as she could, for the address of Lindsay's salon. The van was white, with the kind of hinged tailgate doors Katie associated with florists or painting companies. A peach-toned sunrise was painted on the sides, where in the place of a sun, A golden cupcake was haloed with words. "We're up all night," they read, "to bake you a great day." The shop's name was styled as a bold purple hashtag. Hashtag cupcakes first. Katie had an instant craving for a second frosted breakfast. The name seemed to justify it. If you'd indulge in a donut first thing, why not a cupcake? She liked this woman's style, even if she was sort of afraid to go inside. The storefront looked welcoming, though, painted in warm tones matching the van, with window boxes of purple flowers jutting over the sidewalk. The rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening as the mid-morning sun threaded through the clouds. Bess had reluctantly gone to the office, promising to keep a lookout for anything that might be cast in a new light now that she was in the know. Meanwhile, Katie couldn't rest until she'd set into motion some plan for getting Lindsay out of her loft and on her way, for all their sakes. Through the Cupcakes First logo stenciled onto the shop's picture window, she saw a line at the counter. Moms in animated chit-chat over their strollers, all wearing cross-trainers and a colorful array of yoga pants, as if they'd walked over from a Mommy and Me class. The first mom held a paper-to-go bag, so Katie lingered outside while the rest collected their orders. She pretended to study the grab box full of free monthlies, Cincinnati Family and Cincinnati Parent, one boasting a summer camp guide and the other a calendar of preschool open houses. Moments like this still gave her a pang, provoking a mental calculation. If her one and only pregnancy had stuck, she and Clark would have an 11-year-old, a child older than even their marriage lived to be, a reminder of why it had happened at all. Which was to say, there was no reason, really, to feel this annoying nostalgia looking at photos of summer campers who were barely potty trained. That would have been long behind her by now. It was her own Camp Aunt Katie that would have taken on new meaning, her son or daughter joining their cousins from Tennessee. Her nieces would not be the relative strangers they were now. She and Gigi would have seen each other through all the milestones, their kids so close in age they'd be as thick as thieves, even across the miles. Katie would have leaned into the relationship instead of letting the pain of her miscarriage keep her away when her sister was fighting through pain of her own. It was an odd juxtaposition, how Gigi's husband had left despite their daughters, how Katie's had stayed despite their loss. Katie supposed some degree of mutual resentment had been inevitable. Of course, Gigi would see Clark as noble, even as he stayed for the wrong reasons, even as he'd refused to get pregnant again. Of course, Katie would see Gigi as blessed by a house full of daughterly love, even when Gigi was overwhelmed and exhausted. Both sisters had been so heartbroken to begin with, the last thing they needed was to break each other's hearts again, but that was exactly what they'd done. Maybe, Katie thought ruefully, Lindsay showing up at her door was life's way of throwing her privileges in her face, a wake-up call. If the distance from Clark hadn't brought immediate perspective, how about a gut check from a woman whose boyfriend made him look like a saint? A woman who'd been so threatened and wronged, she'd sooner put her faith in a clueless stranger than risk setting foot outside the loft. What's that, Katie? You're still sad your picket fence didn't pan out? Still wishing you could fast forward to making things right with your sister? Because deep down, you both worry you're only reconciling because you finally need her as much as she needs you? Poor Katie. Poor, pathetic you. She tried to imagine what she'd be doing today if not for Lindsay showing up last night. The loneliness of being stuck inside on a wet day she'd hoped to spend out exploring. She might be settling in, unpacking, looking more closely through Grace's things. Or, if she were honest, she might be lingering over her own boxes, paging wistfully through photo albums, taking the Christmas record off the turntable and searching the vinyl collection for sweet, sad songs. There was something to be said for a distraction, a good deed. The door opened with a tingle of chimes, and the stroller-pushing moms filed past, smiles looking more forced up close. "Not wait," one toddler was screaming. "Cupcake now! Now!" Inside, the young woman tidying her display case could not have been over 25. She might have even passed for a teenager, except for the way she carried herself. She literally looked like she owned the place. Proud posture, sure hands, nothing like the picture Lindsay had painted of the frantic girl trying to help her. Her hair wasn't pink, but bright purple, blunt cut into an asymmetrical bob. Yet Katie had a strong feeling this was the baker. The shop was even smaller than it had looked outside. No room for another person behind the counter. The door to the kitchen stood open, yet there was no clanging of pans, no chatter. Only the alternative radio station playing from a soundbar. "May I help you?" the woman asked, tucking the long side of her bob behind her ear. "3 cupcakes to go, please," Katie said. "Your 3 best flavors." Her smile turned warmer. "Selection rotates, but today that would be lemon raspberry, red velvet buckeye, and butterscotch chip." "I trust you." Katie watched closely to see if her word choice might hint this was not just about the cupcakes, but the woman only nodded and began assembling a scored sheet of pink cardboard into a box. "First time in?" the baker asked. "Are cupcakes first?" "It is," Katie said. "Actually," she looked over her shoulder. They were still alone. "Lots of firsts. I just moved here for a new job, as resident caretaker to Grove Reserve." The baker turned her back to Katie to fidget with a pair of disposable gloves. "Oh, really? Never heard of it." "I think you have," Katie said. The baker still didn't look up. She selected a peach frosted cupcake from the display case and placed it gingerly in the box. "What makes you say that?" Katie slid the Safe Haven card onto the glass between them. The baker's eyes went wide. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. She held a red and white iced cupcake suspended midair. "She showed up," Katie whispered back, "last night." "She's okay?" There was the youthful impatience Katie had anticipated. The baker's eyes glistened, flicking past Katie to the door. "More or less. We're awaiting instructions. For next steps?" Abruptly, the baker returned the cupcake to the case. "You shouldn't be here." "Hang on." The baker was unpacking the box with startling speed, tugging the folds flat. "That wasn't a ruse. I wanted those." "You can't have them," she hissed. "None of us carry anything that can link us to the others." "But Her boyfriend has been in today. Didn't she tell you he comes here?" Katie blinked, taken aback. "She did," she admitted, "but I didn't think." "No, you didn't think, and neither did I. I mean, I'm glad you have her, but The baker pursed her lips. "Can you come back at 4? This afternoon?" "No, in the morning." Katie looked for some sign that she was kidding. She saw none. "Sorry, but it's safest. Come to the back door. We'll talk in the kitchen." "Should I bring her?" "Absolutely not." The baker closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. "Listen, the most important thing, do not say anything to anyone, either of you. Just sit tight." Katie shifted her weight, uncertain. She'd come determined not to leave without answers, yet she'd given no thought to coming in broad daylight during peak hours. Back in the relative privacy of Grove, she felt on high alert, paranoid they'd be caught, yet somehow in coming here she hadn't dwelled on the warnings inherent in Lindsay's story. And though Katie could not imagine how anyone could possibly link a random cupcake customer to a hairstylist who hadn't shown up for work today nearby, she hadn't tried to imagine it. She was that out of her depth. "Understood," she said. "Let's exchange names and numbers just in case." "Nope, you've already been here too long. See you at 4. She cleared her throat. "Thanks for coming in," she announced cheerily, as if they were putting on a stage play. "Sorry, I can't handle that order on such notice. Hope your friend has an amazing birthday." Katie chanced another look around, confused. There definitely was no audience within earshot, but when she turned back toward the counter, the door to the kitchen was swinging closed. The baker was gone. There was a mountain of gravel in the driveway of the caretaker's house, precisely where Katie's car had been parked an hour before. It was a ludicrously huge thing to materialize unexpectedly, like one of those Wile E. Coyote cartoons where an anvil falls from the sky. But Katie didn't feel like laughing. A dump truck idled noisily, blocking her path. The jumpsuited driver stood with one hand on his door, waiting while Jude walked a slow circle around the gravel, as if inspecting it for quality. Both men ignored Katie's car as it rolled to a stop, though they'd left nowhere to park. Her eyes drew a nervous triangle from the barn door to the gravel mountain to the garage where Lindsay was hidden. All appeared still, doors closed, window coverings undisturbed. She lowered her windows, and the clattering of the truck's engine filled the car like 1,000 ping-pong balls in a spinning steel barrel. At least she didn't have to worry about anyone hearing Lindsay. Still, she didn't like this. Completing his orbit, Jude nodded his approval, and the driver handed over a clipboard for his signature. "Hey," she called over the racket, "what's going on?" Nobody answered, but the driver climbed back into the truck and motioned toward Katie, a gesture that meant get out of the way, but didn't indicate how. Irritated, no way was she backing all the way down her driveway in front of so much jeering testosterone. She did an awkward three-point turn onto the edge of her front lawn and waited while the truck ambled by, honking as it rounded the curve. The honk was the last straw. She whipped into the driveway, right up to the mountain, not caring if Jude had room to angle his pickup past her. He should have thought of that before showing up unannounced again. "Special delivery," he greeted her. Katie climbed out as coolly as she could. "I will not look up at the loft window again," she told herself. "If I look, it will make him look. I will not, I will not, I will not." "I can see that," she replied, "and this is for—" "High time to even out this driveway. I'm sure you saw this morning how bad the puddles get. Once they start running like creeks, they erode the surface. Not the safest, especially with your hatchback." Katie gritted her teeth, nerves jangling. Did this mean he had seen the puddles this morning in Bess's car? Had he knocked at her door and found it odd that no one answered? Or was he speaking generally of rainy spring days? "I did see," she made herself say, "but I don't see a hatchback, only a crossover that handles puddles fine." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, it needed done. Forecast is clear for a few days. If we tag team it, I think we can finish before the weather turns." A few days stuck spreading gravel with Jude right here in the space between her house and the hidden loft. Jude, who'd been poking through her barn yesterday, grumbling about kids climbing where they didn't belong and adults ignoring warning signs. Was this all a coincidence, or was he testing her somehow? "You mean work through the weekend?" Katie only meant to point out that tomorrow was Friday, but she sounded like a slacker. "Not that I won't be here," she added, hoping to sound more concerned about his time off. Jude shrugged. "Flexible schedules here. When a weekend makes sense, we make it up somewhere else." She surveyed him more closely. He did seem oblivious to anything but the task at hand, oblivious and uninclined to take breaks or cut shifts short. This was so far from what Katie wanted to spend the rest of this day doing, let alone tomorrow or her first week here. She'd been talking herself down the whole drive back from the baker's, watching her rearview mirror for anyone following her home, fighting panic that 4 a.m. was too far away. It was too easy to picture herself arriving to find the bakery empty, locked, and dark, to imagine the baker fleeing and taking the answers with her. She told herself she could use the time, look for other clues Grace might have left behind, but Jude and his surprise project would derail those plans. And what about poor Lindsay? Katie envisioned her up under the eaves of the outbuilding now, crouching in fear at the commotion, wondering if she was on the verge of being discovered. "Do not even think about looking up there," Katie reminded herself. "There is no loft, there is no Lindsay, only me on my second full day at a new job." "I can get this," Katie heard herself say. "It's not a two-person job." "It's a pretty big pile of rocks," Jude observed. "Pretty big driveway." "I will find a pretty big shovel." "A big shovel," he repeated. His eyes crinkled as if he was enjoying their banter in spite of himself. Not that he seemed to be bantering intentionally. Everything he said was so literal. "I could use the exercise," she elaborated. "Fine, but rocks are heavy. You might make better headway with a small shovel." Katie appraised the gravel mountain once more. She spread a mulch pile this size once, having assumed Clark would help, and learned the hard way that she should have asked first. "I'd have hired someone," he'd said. It had taken almost a week, the smell permeating her hair, her nostrils, and finally the whole house. Long soaks in the tub had done nothing to ease the bone-deep soreness, her oozing blisters, or her wounded pride. Katie tried to smile. "Well, I'm sure the barn is full of shovels of all sizes. What is it with every caretaker they hire, always trying to get rid of me?" He was looking at her in that way he had, like he didn't miss a beat, and again, her suspicion stirred. "Maybe," she said, "we're trying to prove we can do the job. Driveway repair isn't technically in your job description, it's in mine." Still, Katie fought the urge to check the loft window. No wonder she was such a terrible card player. Bluffing did not come naturally. Would she last the week out here without showing her hand? Would she ever trust that when Jude left for the day he was gone for good? Chevy chose that moment to come trotting toward Katie with a kitten-like exuberance. Her mouth looked strange, and it took Katie a moment to register the cat had something furry clamped in her jaws. She dropped it at Katie's feet. It appeared to be a mole, but was hard to say for certain since it had no head. "Aw," Juice said. "A welcome gift. Chevy likes you." Katie stepped back, trying not to retch. "For the record," he said, "I thought I'd do the shoveling. You can spread it with a rake. Teamwork?" Then, so fast she could almost convince herself she'd imagined it, he did the thing she'd been trying not to do. He glanced up at the eaves of the garage building, at the covered window with the apartment on the other side. She blanched, but by the time she registered what was happening, his eyes were back on hers, and he was offering an actual smile, like a peace offering. Had it been nothing? A coincidence? An accident? A warning? Some unspoken sign? How would she ever function with this level of paranoia? At least here, she could keep an eye on him. If Jude was with her, he wasn't poking around somewhere else. Teamwork, she agreed. Despite everything, she almost wished he were on her team after all. She didn't know yet if anyone else really was. There was nighttime dark, and then there was middle of the night dark, and then there was Grover's Herd. Beyond the floodlights of the house stretched an encroaching moonless black, poised to swallow any trace of color until it was one with the inky forest. Katie was not a morning person, let alone a 3:30 in the morning person, yet she felt sharply alert as she steered the wide beams of her headlights down the Caretaker's drive toward the creek. She'd surprised herself by sleeping at all, though she supposed an afternoon of manual labor had helped. Lindsay had been an odd comfort too when Jude finally left and Katie rushed up to the hidden stairs, full of apologies, only to find her calmly playing solitaire on the rug near the window, where the natural light was best. When Katie filled her in on the clumsy visit to the baker, to be continued, Lindsay said simply, "Makes sense," and excused herself for a stroll around the pond. When Katie welcomed her back with a plate of steaming pasta, Lindsay said only, "Thank you, and I'll stay out of your hair, and good luck tonight." Some of that calm must have rubbed off on Katie. She was weirdly grateful. As Katie rolled onto the bridge across the creek, eyes on the oval of concrete lit by her headlights, like a deep-sea diver with no peripheral vision, she marveled that anyone could find their way through on foot. Maybe women like Lindsay were the only ones who could. Maybe you needed that terror to chase you, unquestionably worse than the unknown on the other side. Yet Katie wasn't afraid. The clouds chose that minute to slide apart, shifting the world from indistinguishable pitch to deep shadow. Katie slowed to a stop in the center of the bridge and looked up through the glass of her sunroof. There, a slice of moon, a smattering of stars. She flicked off her headlights, blinked her eyes to adjust, and yes, it was enough to illuminate the creek, a flowing ebony shimmer mere feet below the narrow slab where her car sat. Peering down at the rush of water, swollen from the rain, she had the surreal sensation of hovering there, suspended out of reach, safe but only just from the most beautiful kind of danger. Her fingers found the panel on the door, lowering all 4 windows at once. She cut the engine, and the car fell silent, yielding to the sound of water flowing on its endless, winding journey, beholden to nothing, to no one. The cold wasted no time filling the car, but even as she shivered through her coat, she sensed a magical energy, as if this one spot in the world, for this one moment, belonged to her. She closed her eyes, breathed it in through her nose, invited it in through every pore in her skin, through every small hole that had ever been ripped in her soul. She would have missed this if not for the baker. She wouldn't have dared venture down here at this hour alone, but this was what she'd come for, wasn't it? To be a part of something outside herself, to tap into the flow she'd always known must be there, somewhere, sustaining the world just out of sight, to go where she liked, when she liked, explaining herself to no one. Yet she could have so easily slept through it all the best, most unexpected parts. Life was like that. Katie sat that way, marveling for a few trance-like minutes until it was time to go, but not before making herself a promise. No matter what happened next, she would not cower at home, intimidated by her own unfounded fears. She would not be afraid of the dark. Alright, guys, I'm gonna stop here. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much for sitting with me, and of course, a happy Women's History Month to everyone. I hope that you guys have a good rest of your day and be well.